You're listening to Young PR Pros episode 118, Work-Life Balance.
A common issue our generation is trying to cope with is work-life balance. For our parents' generation, most people could survive on one income. At the same time, unions were born, giving way to the 9-to-5 workday. That reality is now but a fantasy. With higher costs in education resulting in more debt, decrease in job security, and soaring house prices, it is no wonder most of us will end up in a 2-income household, or working several odd-end jobs just to make ends meet. Not to mention the age of the internet, smartphones, and FOMO means we are consistently plugged into work and social media. All of this coalesces into a perfect storm. All work, no play lifestyle. So what is a millennial to do? How can we balance our work with our life? Recently, France banned after-work emails in a move to try and solve what they considered an epidemic. A France study in 2014 found those doing work after hours were more likely to report at least one health problem, ranging from the psychological to gastrointestinal and cardiovascular. But is this really the solution? Do we need to ban after-work emails to find a work-life balance? That is our topic today. Not an easy nut to crack, but we will walk through our tips and advice for young professionals looking to strike a healthy balance. These tips may shift based on your personality, priorities, and general life circumstances, but we hope to provide you with easy and concrete tips to finding your perfect balance. So the first question I have for everyone is trying to figure out this magic equation. Is there a magic equation to trying to balance work and life? And once you've found that equation, how do you maintain it? Claire, do you want to share with us your magic equation?
So for myself, I think a huge part of it is just keeping track of yourself and establishing a routine. Dependent on the job or the time of your life, it's really, I think, hard to specify on any one equation. Like, it's really hard to think of it as this plus this. It really does vary per person and per situation, but no matter what, I do think a routine is key. If you find yourself running out of time to do the basic things like grocery shopping, cleaning, exercise, all that, and I have definitely been there, then you really need to set up a routine that makes sure you can get all those little things done. If it means waking up earlier or saving, going out for certain nights of the week, or even sometimes promising yourself that you're not going to work late more than 2 days a week, I think it's worth it, because once you get a regular routine established, or at least once I get a regular routine established, I feel a lot more balanced and prepared and kind of centered. And that's how I maintain that kind of balance. But that being said, I kind of hate the concept of work-life balance just because I think a lot of people think of it as a destination, when I like to think of it as a process. We're always working to juggle things. It's just adapting as life and work changes to keep that same juggling routine and keep a happy routine.
What about you, Ross? Do you have a magic equation?
Well, I was about to drop the mic for Claire because I loved everything there. 100%.
Yeah.
I was doing fist pumps while I'm listening. You nailed it.
Ross.
For me, work-life balance is something that I've spent a lot of time thinking about, probably more time than I should, which indicates maybe some balance issues. But my overall belief is similar to Claire in the sense of, like, I don't strive for balance. It's not something that I look to achieve in my life. There's a great quote by a guy, his name is Alan de Botton, and I may have mispronounced that, but he says there's no such thing as work-life balance. Everything worth fighting for unbalances your life. And I love that quote so much because I believe whether it's a relationship, a new project, your health, achieving a lifelong goal of writing a novel or anything like that, all of these things require sacrifice in some other sense of the word. So for me, instead of always looking for balance, I like to just believe in trying to find some sense of work-life integration, where the things that you do with your work and the things that get you excited in your day-to-day life all just blend well together. I think that too often we're seeing people beat themselves up for not spending enough time with their colleagues, beating themselves up for not calling a cousin on their birthday, when we really need to just realize everybody's winging it. Like, nobody has this thing figured out. And if you're giving it all you've got and you're trying to do better, then just be proud of that and keep doing that, because at the end of the day, nobody's figured out how to be the perfect professional. Nobody's figured out how to be the perfect father, the perfect mother, the perfect spouse. If you're giving it all you've got and some things feel a little bit unbalanced, I don't believe that you should feel guilty for it. If you're giving your all to your life, then my hat's off to you anyway.
That's really good. That's I like not beating yourself up that part, because I do feel that often people tend to strive for this perfect balance, and it's not always achievable. What about you, Julia? How do you have a magic equation? How do you balance work and life?
Well, I don't think there's any magic equation, and I think it's different for every individual, simply because every person's situation is a little bit different in the workplace, out at home, and so on and so forth. But what Claire said really resonated with me, because work-life balance is not a destination, and people think that, there is a magic equation that, suddenly you've attained a work-life balance. And I think that for me, I've never had hard and fast rules. It's just been something that, when I go to sleep at night, I feel settled. I feel at peace with, all of the effort I'm putting into all different aspects of my life. And I think that if you don't have healthy work-life balance, you know it, and it's just a feeling. And if you do, you also know it, and it's just a feeling. But we're going to talk a little bit more today, I'm sure, about, tips on how to make that work and how to excel in your career, because that's what this podcast is about.
Yeah, and I think, I'm not going to repeat what the three of you guys said, because I think you all kind of hit it on the nail. And yes, it is a process and it's not a destination. I'm just going to chime in with a couple of things that I do to help me in that process. Now, I happen to work for an excellent organization that facilitates a healthy work-life balance, and I have the ability to work from home 1 day a week, which helps with, it's so simple. 1 day a week, I get to be home with my son, but I still work. But in between emails, I can go and I can do laundry, which is like these little things that you kind of take for granted. It's just like they're such small tasks, but when you're trying to cram it all in one day, it's really, really difficult. So I consider myself very lucky, and it hasn't really been that difficult to strike that balance, because I chose an employer who is proud to create that sort of environment. So they also have, flex days are where you work an extra 45 minutes a day, and every second Friday you have off. So those second Fridays you could do your running around that, you have a little extended long weekend, or that's the day that you need to, go renew your passport or go renew your license plate or something like that, or do a doctor's appointment or something like that. So one of the things to, as you're sort of like building your career, if that work-life balance is a really important thing to you, always ask the question in interviews to potential employers. When I first started my career, I worked with an agency, and I knew that I was going to be working really hard, and my priority was to build on my career. I didn't, other than, my husband at the time, I didn't have anything else to go home to, right? I was really working on trying to be the best employee as possible and to gain that experience. So my priority at the time is, my work-life balance at the time was working a lot and then coming home and spending some time with my husband. So now that has shifted, I have different priorities.
Hey, podcast listeners, if you're enjoying today's episode, which you obviously are because you're still here, please leave us a review on iTunes. It helps others discover the show and helps us keep doing what we're doing. Thank you in advance. Now, back to the show.
And I'm going to segue into the next section of this talk is this magic equation, this process. I mean, we've already said that it changes depending on everyone, but it also shifts depending on your career. Like I said, the first 2 years of my career was 100% career, dedicated to building career, getting that experience, doing everything I could to just absorb as much information as I could. And then I got married, I had a child, and now my priorities have shifted. Doesn't necessarily mean that work is not high up there. It is, but I also have to balance that with being a good mom and a good wife. And that, I mean, again, I said it's easy for me because I work with a really great, a great employer that facilitates that. But I mean, I'm the type of person, I mean, we've said it on the show before. I mean, I love the bullet journal, and I honestly actually put it in as a task. Sometimes if there's a thing that I need to do that's related, whether it's work or life, if it's go skating with the family, I put it in my calendar and I dedicate that time and I say, this is what I'm going to do. And it's something that I check off at the end of the day. It's more of, I see my full day as just my life, and work and life melds in between the two. And I've found that balance and I'm content now. But I mean, we can be honest too. There are days where it doesn't work. And there are days where it does work great. And it's like you finish the day and you're like, I can't believe I got everything done. I can't believe I managed to balance everything. But then there are other days where you get to the end of the day and you're like, I don't, how am I going to make it through the next day? Right. So not beating yourself up, and also realizing that things shift. And if you're noticing that your priorities are shifting, then you have to shift that process of how you're going to balance things. So Julia, how has your equation shifted throughout your career?
Well, I mean, similar to you, the first few years were kind of all or nothing. And at a time in my life when I didn't have a child and a husband and so on and so forth. And now that I live in a city where I'm closer to family, there's lots of family demands too. But I will admit that time with friends and my husband and family has always been important to me through the beginning of my career. And not to say it wasn't important to you, Christine, with what you described, but I was always pretty good about carving out time for personal things. And I think that when you start a new job, you set the tone. And if you're, responding to emails 24/7 in your first month on the job, that's what your colleagues are going to come to expect from you for the remainder of your employment there. So I kind of set boundaries very early. I set expectations where I'm comfortable with them. And, if I never answer an email after 8 p.m., no one's going to expect me to suddenly answer an email after 8 p.m. That being said, unbeknownst to my colleagues, I always had, my eye on the subject lines of the emails that were coming in, and everyone always had my phone number and could contact me in case of emergency. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely evolved. I think it'll be a new world when I'm back at work with children, as you are discovering, Christine.
Yeah, and I just want to touch on the fact that you're glancing at your phone but not actively actually engaging and emailing back and forth. Yeah. I think that's actually something that everyone in our industry is, not just our industry, I think everyone in general is just a reality. And I don't think it's bad to glance at your phone just to kind of see what's coming in. We're in an industry where we're a lot of times a public voice for an organization, or Ross, for you've got clients, right, that have needs at, any time of the day. Always being connected is not necessarily a bad thing. It's whether or not you're constantly actually engaging with that. And for me, I never know if it's going to be a media call or if it's, some journalist who's calling me because they're breaking a news story the next morning and we're involved in it. Like, I can't just say that after 8, I am never going to, or after 9, I'm never going to answer anything, right? I still have to glance at it just because that's the responsibility of my job. Now, not in every case. It always depends on kind of what job. I'm more in the public affairs world. So that is something that I take on when I took the job, right? I knew that there was that expectation. So, which is another thing when you're looking at the work-life balance. When you get a new job, there is an expectation at the onset of what is expected of you. And then, like Julia said, and then you set an expectation of, what your boss should expect from you as well. So, So Ross, what about you? How has things shifted throughout your career?
Yeah, so I'd say the biggest shift is just going from being a employee to running my own business. I'd say that shift in my career resulted in the biggest shift in terms of like my so-called like work-life balance. And in the early days of both, I worked hard. But I would say when I made that transition into my own thing, those first few months were probably some of the hardest working months that I've ever had in my life, because it was really do or die kind of thing, right? Like I had to make my business succeed, or I might not pay for my mortgage and I'll lose my house kind of thing. So at that transition period, there was a lot of what many people, and I would even agree, there was a lot of imbalance then, just because I was working some crazy late nights and I was putting in some tons of work, because I had to make that transition into running my own business succeed. As I look forward, I can see family moves and things like that that could also impact how much I can work and how I work and how it all integrates into my life. But I have an extremely supportive partner who's been behind me and my crazy ambitions for many, many years. So because of that, it's allowed me to kind of chase this dream and this passion of mine for entrepreneurship and building things.
We should give a round of applause to your wife because she does deserve a round of applause. Claire, what about you? You're in a unique situation, actually. So for you, the work-life balance is also balancing school and life. And I know with school, as a student, it's like school could be your entire life. I remember the 4 years, it was like I was a student from like the moment I woke up to the time that I went to bed. So I'm curious to hear how you have shifted your priorities and your work-life balance throughout your life.
Oh, yeah. Well, and I think something that I gotta say is it is really interesting how different all of our positions and experiences are. And I think that's super indicative of just how personal this equation is. And it's kind of cool that we have this spectrum of people in different places dealing with it. But yeah, for myself, I'm in my early 20s. And I think when you are younger, regardless of whether you're in school or work, it is really natural to shift more towards one thing, like work or life. When you graduate, you either jump right into a career in work and then that becomes a focus, or you pick up a part-time job and you focus on enjoying free time and connecting and expanding your circle. You go from school, which takes over everything, and to be honest is this kind of abyss where you oftentimes just completely throw yourself at everything and give it whatever you've got, which is very much what I'm in right now. I gotta say, school is very much everything, but it's also a fascinating balance of side projects like this and the things that I do on the side and working a part-time job to try and earn the money. But I do think that it's really an interesting thing for young people, and I think it's really fascinating because once people start a career, like officially get out of school, where I'm hoping to be in just a few months, there is a lot of pressure to focus solely on your career and make sacrifices. You often hear the term, at least in my industry, about cutting your teeth or paying your dues. And for many, especially in media and broadcast, this often means going to a smaller city for a job or working 7 days a week for an indeterminate amount of time. And I think it's fair, but you definitely can't maintain that forever. At a certain point, you don't have any teeth left to cut. So as you develop your skills, you gain a lot of confidence and I hope feel more comfortable taking charge of your career. And then, as Julia mentioned, as you build a family, you take more time to do things outside of work and your priorities really do change. So it is a very natural flow, and it's kind of cool how it's different for everyone. I'm very much still in the black abyss that is school and just kind of throwing everything I've got at it. But I'm looking forward to experiencing that shift back and forth. It is an ongoing process of evaluating what works best for you. But right now, I've got my routine. I focus on school, and then the second I have a spare moment, I'm working on a project. But like every night around 9:30, 10 p.m., my phone goes off. I sit down. More often than not, I'm watching Grey's Anatomy. But, it's finding those moments. That's my balance. Yeah.
Nice.
So, Claire, you brought up something that I just want to comment on. So, a lot of it's just, kind of nature, just because two of us have just had children on this podcast, but we're basically saying that, once your priority shifts, so once you start a family, then, that's another way that you have to start balancing your work and life. But we should also kind of mention that just because you don't have kids doesn't necessarily mean that there are people out there who, without kids, who don't have the problem of work-life balance. Spending time with your spouse or spending time with family or whoever it is, or just spending time with yourself, that is also part of a work-life balance. And it just because you have a family doesn't mean that it's harder for us than for others. So the work-life balance is a tough nut to crack for anyone in any stage of their life, and whatever circumstance they're in. And I think going back to the top of the show when we were talking about this process is you just have to keep trying and trying different things and until you find that balance. And at the end of the day, you kind of feel complete.
Calling all young PR pros. We need your help. We're coming up on a milestone for this podcast, and we want you to help us celebrate. After 5 years, you have stuck with us and helped us turn into the show we are now, with thousands of downloads. Thank you so much from all of us. Now, we want you to tell us your story. What's a milestone you reached that you were proud of? What's a milestone you are working towards right now? And even how, if in any way, has Young PR Pros helped you work towards those milestones? We want to share your story, so let us hear your voice. Using a smartphone, record a voice memo, send it to youngprpros@gmail.com, and you could be featured on our next episode. Sounds super easy, right? Don't worry, I promise I'll make you sound great. Thanks for listening, and thank you in advance for telling us what your milestone is. I'm looking forward to hearing your story.
Jumping on to the next and the last segment of today's show, let's talk about the hardest part in trying to find work-life balance. So I know we keep saying that it's a process and, it's different for everyone, but I want to know for everyone, because I'm sure there's our listeners are probably going to relate with every single one of our experience. But what is that one difficult part in trying to find that work-life balance? And what do you suggest? What's the one tip that you suggest to our listeners, a concrete tip that you suggest to our listeners to overcome that challenge? So let's start with you, Ross.
Yes. So for me, I would say the hardest part in finding all of this is really being able to look friends, family members, spouses, so on and so forth, kids probably even, in the eye and say, yeah, I got to work right now instead of spend time with you. I think that's the toughest part. And while I understand and recognize that when you are passionate about your work, you can get caught up in it and you can chase it and you can see that dream and run towards it. And I take my hat off for that. But I definitely believe it is hard when you have to look someone in the eye and be like, yeah, I have to do this. I have to do that. I can't spend time with you right now. I have to tackle a problem. I'd say that's the hardest thing. And the way that I've found to overcome those challenges is twofold. One, say no to a lot of things. So a lot of people ask me for my time and I have to say no a lot of times to people who aren't necessarily my family members, my friends, direct contacts as it relates to business and things like that. Because by me saying yes to these things, I'm taking away time from the people who matter. So you have to be willing to say no. And then the second thing is to live and die by your calendar. So make sure that you use your calendar, you block off time to have a date night every week, you block off time to ensure that on the weekends you're spending it with your friends, your family, your kids, whatever that may be, and you tell people around you that your calendar is king. So if somebody wants to schedule a call with me on a Friday afternoon and that's date night, it isn't happening just because it's blocked off in my calendar.
I like that. And I do live and die by my calendar. Not because, yes, for the, the work-life balance, but I also have like the worst memory. So if it doesn't go on my calendar, it's like not happening. So it's got to go on my calendar. Otherwise I'm not going to remember. I think for me, and I'm sure there's a lot of young mothers out there who are going to relate with this, is feeling guilty when I choose work. new moms going back to work, that guilt of dropping your child off at daycare can really, eat you inside, or deciding to stay an extra hour at work, or, doing a work event or something like that. And again, I always strive to have that balance, so I'm not working all the time, but I'm really trying to get to a place where I don't feel guilty when I want to work on my career, because I can be a good mom and a good employee and a good manager and a good boss all at the same time. I don't think I need to choose one or the other. So getting rid of that guilt. And for me, it's that the mom guilt, but that guilt could be felt towards anyone. I mean, I also used to feel that guilt when I was working a lot in the first couple of years of my career, and I wasn't spending a lot of time with, my husband. But, I told him that, work was really important, and my ambition was to get as much experience as I could in the first 2 years. And I have a very supportive spouse who understood that. So letting go of that guilt, I think, can help you feel balanced at the end of the day. Because if you're constantly guilty doing something that you love because you feel like you're abandoning, whether it's family members or a child or a spouse, then you're never going to find that balance. But if you can come at peace with the fact that you can do it all, and you don't have to be a super woman or a super mom, you can just be a regular mom, and you can work, and you can do a podcast, and you can do everything that you want and enjoy, and even try to squeeze in a run, to try to keep yourself healthy. So I think it's not feeling guilty doing the things that you love. And I mean, for a tip to how to overcome that challenge is sitting down and talking with the people around you and letting them know that you're not saying, to your point, Ross, you're not saying no because you don't want to be with them. You're saying no because at this point you really need to work on a specific issue for your client, or you're not saying no to someone to a phone call because you don't want their business. You're saying no because you plan this time as date night, and date night is date night, and it's in your calendar, right? So it's letting people say that no is not a rejection. No is not right now because I have another priority that I'm working on. So
I like that.
That's mine. What about you, Claire? What's the hardest part for you right now, and how do you overcome it?
Well, first I got to say the whole guilt thing does extend to my dog. So it is a real thing that a lot of people can relate to, whether or not you have children.
Fair enough.
But aside from that, I think for myself right now, it's very much accepting this whole cutting my teeth idea. There's a lot of pressure to get up and move off to a small market, find a job there. But it is a hard thing to wrap your head around, going from university, which is a super social and tight-knit environment, and now, again, college, which is another super social and tight-knit environment, into a city where I don't know anyone. It can be a huge shock. And I have experienced that before. And it's not that I'm afraid of it, but it is a spooky thing for a lot of people. And I think for a lot of people, it is a good choice, but it doesn't have to be the right choice. My biggest advice, I think, to young professionals who are facing this idea of, cutting your teeth in a certain market, or taking a risk or a shortcoming in order to get further, don't give in to pressure from other people around you to take risks if you really don't want to. And don't feel like you have to go whole hog. Take a short internship or a contract rather than a full-time position in Yorktown, Saskatchewan if you're on the fence. Don't be afraid to say no. Don't be afraid to set a limit, because everyone has different needs. And everyone's balance does look a little different. A lot of people are comfortable moving all the way across the country for a few years, and that's totally cool. But if that's not you, that's okay. Make sure to take care of yourself first. And if you find that your own well-being is slipping in the balance, or you're losing yourself because you feel like you have to make a choice, that is a serious sign that you need to take a step back. And I do think that was the hardest thing for me, and it is for a lot of young people, is knowing when to say no or pass on an opportunity, because it is hard. I mean, you don't have experience or any guarantee that another opportunity will come because you've never had that before. But you really do have to trust your gut and take care of yourself first and foremost, because the whole point of balance is that you're sitting comfortably in between the two. So you can't really lose sight of yourself as you're in the middle.
So can we drop the mic for Claire a second time today?
She's killing it.
Very articulate.
What about you, Julia? What's been your hardest part, and how have you overcome it?
Well, I'm obviously not currently working, right? So I'm on maternity leave. I have about 2 months left of my maternity leave. But I had a conversation with my father this morning, and I said, Dad, I kind of know how you feel. Like, I'm getting to the point where I'm going to have to start saying no to people because I'm back in my home community and I am getting asked to be involved in all sorts of things. And this obviously isn't, related to my paycheck, but boards and organizations and groups and charitable campaigns and all sorts of stuff. People now know I'm back in Halifax and everybody seems to want a piece of me. And so I'm going to have to learn to say no. And, right back to the guilt thing. You want to be able to do everything, but realistically, you just can't. So for me, it's finding a way to do as you said and say, maybe ask me this time next year. That kind of thing.
And I had a mentor of mine once where I basically went to them and I said, it was also in the beginning of my career, I just wanted to say yes to every opportunity, but I ended up at the point where I had said yes to like way too many volunteer positions to the point where I couldn't respond to everyone, and I wasn't doing a proper job for all the organizations that I had volunteered for. And I remember, confiding into one of my mentors, and she says, there's only so much work you can do for free. And to kind of keep that in mind, right? And you've got your job, and it's okay to take on volunteer because, we've said it time and time again on this podcast that volunteering is really going to help you in your career. But you also can't volunteer for every single organization that comes to you. And it's just, again, because there's only so many hours in a day and you've got to pick your priorities, right? So kind of keeping that in mind when you're trying to balance. And sometimes you notice that you just have too much stuff on your plate. And I had to do that when I went back to work after my maternity leave. I had to assess, okay, I will have a child. I will have my full-time job. I've got my podcast, and there's a few other things that I'm really passionate about, but I'm going to have to choose. And I had to let go of a few things that I had been working on for the past couple of years. But again, taking that guilt off my shoulders, because it's not that I'm abandoning them. It's, I've given in my time, and thanks for giving me the experience, but I need to make sure that I concentrate on my life. So
now comes my favorite part of the episode, which is where I get to ask everyone what they learned today. Christine, how about you?
So I learned something. I think it's more of like a reminder, because we're talking about that guilt, but it's a reminder to say no and not to feel guilty about it. So that's that's my lesson learned that I want to reiterate today is it's okay to say no, because I know especially as like young professionals, we're told that, you go to your new job and you just say yes to everything, right? Because why would the new person say no? But if I've got a funny little anecdote of an example of where saying yes to too much actually ended up getting in trouble. I had there was like a bunch of different executives in the organization that I was working for. The president came in and he asked me to do a little task and I said yes. And then a VP came in and he asked me to do a task and I said, of course I could do that. And then another VP came into the office and said, can you do this? And I said, yes. And then I realized that I had said yes to 3 different tasks and they were all due within the next hour. And each of them were probably going to take me an hour to do. And I had to go back to say, sorry, I actually committed myself to too much. And that actually looked bad, right? So making sure that, we don't say yes to everything and we try to strategically say yes and we say no to things that we just can't handle and not feel guilty about it. I want to underline that part. We don't need to feel guilt because we're doing it, again, to balance, to work towards that balance in our life.
Nice. Julia, how about you?
All of this was just a anxiety creating conversation for the mom that's very close to going back to work. But generally just some really good reminders. I really like what Ross said about how, you kind of have to blend everything and hopefully what you're doing for work is also your passion. So yeah, you find a way for it all to kind of work together.
Ross?
For me, I think that the biggest lesson was that I'm not the only person in Halifax who has a bunch of people asking for them to do things. But in reality, in seriousness, that was a good reminder that everyone is going through this. Like, these feelings that everybody has around trying to be pulled in a bunch of different ways between life, work, volunteering, and stuff like that. It's a consistent thing amongst anybody who is ambitious and is a young professional trying to really achieve some meaningful things in their career. So it's just a constant, refreshing reminder to know that other people are there with you. And I think it's also encouraging to know that people are fighting the same fight that you are on a day-to-day basis.
Nice. Yeah, I think a lot of what I learned today is that sometimes what I say actually makes sense, which is kind of cool. But more than that, I think it does feel good as a young professional to recognize how unique all of this is and how this aspect of work-life balance changes so much per person, but how we are all doing it. And as you said, Russ, how we're all fighting for it. It's not this huge, impossible thing. It definitely takes some work, but it's worth it. And I do look forward to navigating those changes in the future. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Young PR Pros. If you want to reach out, we'd love to hear from you. You can email us at youngprpros@gmail.com or check out our blog at youngprpros.ca. We're on Facebook at Young PR Pros Podcast and on Twitter at Young PR Pros. Thanks, and we'll talk to you next time. Sound effects for this episode were sourced from freesound.org. This podcast contains music from Poddington Bear and Dana Boulay from Free Music Archive. Sound work and editing by Claire Bonnyman.